All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the fourth session of the day. So we are halfway through Tuesday's part of Azure Data Week. If you guys haven't had an opportunity to do so in any of the previous sessions, or if this is your first session, please feel free to answer some of the poll questions down at the bottom. They only take like a few minutes, so we would just love to get your feedback on those. If you guys have any questions for any reason, please feel free to put them in the Ask Question panel or over here in the chat. And if you guys can just give me a thumbs up so I can also make sure that you guys are hearing all this good information that I'm giving you right now, that'd be great. Anybody can just give me a thumbs up so I can make sure the sound is okay. Hello, James. Can you give me a thumbs up so I can make sure that you can hear me okay? Huh. Such a funny, interesting fact. I also grew up in Indy. I lived in Indianapolis my whole entire life until about 5 years ago. And I went to school in Muncie, so. Awesome. Thank you, Jeff. Just wanted to make sure you guys can hear me.
Well, good morning. Since we're getting ready to kick off, everybody hear me okay as well?
Yep, I can hear you, Steve.
Perfect. As long as you're the only one listening, I think we're good to go.
I'm sure that will be too beneficial for everybody else. All right, it is 11 o'clock, so I do want to say for those who are just joining in, if you guys haven't had an opportunity to do so in any of the previous sessions, if you guys can just take a few seconds, moments, sometime in the webinar or after to answer the poll questions that we have down at the bottom, we would greatly appreciate it. But I'm going to go ahead and let Steve get started whenever he's ready.
All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of Azure Data Week, which we already talked about a little bit there. So I'm just really happy to be able to talk with you. I am the Director of Consulting here at Pragmatic Works, and I found my topic really interesting from the perspective of, as I started building an ultimate guide, realized that, well, it may not be the ultimate guide, but hopefully you'll enjoy the process of how we go through estimating Azure consumption, and then really a couple looks at some things to help you monitor and optimize your consumption as we go along. So let's get started on this. Maybe. There we go. So the first thing, what are we talking about today? So today, really, going to Azure has 3 major components you have to take into account as you start to do your cloud journey. So you have to estimate. So as you start to going in and you're jumping in and you may be working with a partner like us or another partner or Microsoft directly, or you may be on your own trying to sort this out. And part of the problem with this is you have to estimate what's going on. And the problem with any estimate, it's roughly calculated, as I noted my definition down there, it's not really an exact science. You don't always get it right. So we're going to walk through some of the things I have to do when I estimate for our customers, for small and large projects, because there is a significant amount of work that goes into calculating what this could possibly be and accounting for a lot of things. And we've done this a number of times now. So hopefully you can glean something from our experience when you're getting ready to estimate what your consumption would look like. The middle block there is talking about monitor. I didn't put a definition of monitor, but when you after you make your estimate and then you deploy, it's going to become really obvious. You need to come monitor what's going on. You need to look at what's happening. You need to assess where you are. And then we'll wrap up with a couple optimization techniques. I just have a kind of a checklist to go down to walk you through based on what you find out when you're monitoring. So what we learned is estimating it's not an exact science, especially when it comes to Azure. It doesn't matter who you're working with, whether it's Microsoft or us. I have seen a number of estimates come from customers, my peers and other partners, and Microsoft peers. And it's interesting when we all get together, we all realize that there's more to it than we just expected. And that's typically something to keep in mind as you're doing your estimate. You really are going through this process and you're producing something to essentially build a budget or, evaluate the value of going that direction. Problem is, it's still the whole situation where it's an estimate. When we get down to the optimized side, we want to make the best use of these resources. And I will tell you right now that from our experience, we see that going from estimation to optimization is the key win in making cloud actually work best for you. So let's dig into a little bit here. First of all, when you're doing your estimate, you're doing some work. This is a list of free. I wanted to throw this out here because it affects how estimates work. Now, everything has a cap. Let's just look at like Azure Functions there, kind of the second one over from the top. And it basically gives you 1 million requests per month free. And you'd be surprised what you can do with 1 million requests, but you'd also be surprised at how quickly you can use 1 million requests, which is why they're free. So it comes in all these items that you're seeing on the screen here. When you start building out your estimate or looking at using Azure, remember, there's a whole bunch of Azure that comes for free, and you basically just have to figure out how to best leverage that for you. Now, as you can see, a lot of them have limits, or certain pieces are completely free all the time, like load balancing, the standard load balancer for Azure. You can add it into the calculator, but it's always going to show up as free as long as you don't do something special. If you wanted to add some scale, something like that, you might be different. But there's some things that just never change. The advisor, for instance, we'll talk about advisor later in the day. It's always free all the time. Doesn't matter. It's built into the solution, and it's something that provides guidance for you to help optimize your world in Azure. So there's a lot of things out there that are free. I recommend you go have a look. You can actually go look it up. Free services. You can also see that some that have like starting points that are free. There's free hours you can use, a bunch of things that you're starting with Azure. So first of all, don't be afraid of Azure. There is some opportunity there to take advantage of some free things. And be able to use them. If you're a small organization, you may be able to run a good portion of your data, of your solution in Azure with no cost incurred. Now, there's always going to be a little bit, but we'll look at some of the options around that. But realistically, just be aware there's a bunch out there free, and you should look at what's there and see if it's something that can help you in your experience or as you're building out your estimate. All right, so let's get into estimating consumption. First of all, we're going to talk about using the pricing calculator. And if you want, the pricing calculator is constantly changing to match what's going on from Microsoft. It is a tool that I use for most of my estimations. It provides no discounting for if you have a special arrangement with Microsoft or any of those kind of things. It does account for the free that we talked about before. So, for instance, if you estimate something and you're going to estimate your consumption to go beyond the free metric, you'll get the free accounted for, and then whatever the cost is after that will be in there. One thing I would caution you on whenever you're estimating for consumption, this is what usually bites us on all of our estimates. You got to account for everything. Networking, security, storage. Those are three of the most common scenarios where we run into issues. We actually see on a number of occasions where we didn't account for all the networking requirements, or if they had specific things that they needed. VPN networks. Did you account for ExpressRoute? Where are you at in your journey in the cloud? Oftentimes, Pragmatic Works comes into play when we're getting ready to load a data warehouse solution. If we're doing total greenfield, we have to account for all these things, including implementing Azure Active Directory. Do we, are we in data sync? All this stuff. Now, some of this is included in the cost. It's fairly, either low cost or free, but sometimes it's not. Do you want to have the advanced security settings turned on? Do you want to turn threat protection on? Well, you can turn it on, but it's you're going to add cost by turning the threat protection on. Do you need the threat protection they offer? You may decide I'm not too concerned about that. It's not that it's not secure. It's just that additional level of security gives you more information about who's attacking me. And that's really what you're getting, right? So it comes down to a lot of things like that. So you have to count for everything when you're doing your estimate. Sometimes you get to estimate in the dark. By this, one of my least favorite experiences is opening up something I've been estimating for the past 6 months and go in, and all of a sudden there are 18 new options from Microsoft and how to price it. I think one of the classic use cases in that scenario was when I would often do storage. And for the longest time, when you estimated storage, it was, hey, how much are you going to store? I'm going to store 1 terabyte, and I'm going to store it in a hot version of storage. It's going to be blob, and 1 terabyte. Here's a region. Done. I got a number. Now you get to account for things like, well, how many transactions are going to happen? Microsoft has tweaked and given us more knobs to adjust kind of how we're planning to use that storage. What does it mean? How much will, that'll impact our cost? And we'll look at that in the calculator as well. But there's some things that you just have to account for that you didn't have to before. But one last thing I would say when we're doing our estimating, I always warn customers. I tell them when I give them an estimate, and I'll show you the resulting spreadsheet that we do. We'll just build an estimate out. Add 10% to your starting estimate. This is budgetary. It lets you at least account for things you didn't think you'd see. And trust me, every time you come in under budget, the boss is happy. So, and tell them you be open. Hey, we had to add some additional costs in there because we want to make sure we accounted for everything. And the reality is, what you're going to find is you typically start out with almost low to no cost at the beginning. You have a bubble, and then you move forward. So that's actually, I believe that's my next slide. This happens all the time. That little consumption bubble that happens at the beginning of any of your projects is a result of things like I have to have twice as much storage while I'm migrating. I have to do a lot of other things. What you'll find is as you begin, you aren't optimized. When you come to the cloud, you're not set up for optimization at all. No matter how good you are or how good your partners are, we do everything in our power to keep your cost reasonable. But the reality is there are things that happen that basically bubbles your cost above your estimate at the beginning of any cloud project. And it's very frustrating. It's frustrating for you as an organization, and you're trying to get the cost down while at the same time get moved over. You just have to account for that. We see that happen a lot when people are doing a migration and they land in IaaS. So you end up with a bunch of VMs and you haven't optimized your VM cost yet. So you're running your VMs 24/7. You have more VMs than you actually probably need, or you're running them in the wrong version of them. So maybe you have too much power, not enough, those kind of things. And you get it all set up and you're running, and then you realize, hey, you know what? If I took this website that I'm currently hosting on a VM and put it in Azure websites, it cuts my cost substantially. 80-90% of my cost goes away for that specific purpose. So maybe you couldn't do it during your migration process, but that's one of your first optimizations you look at. How do I get out of IaaS and into PaaS? So go from infrastructure as a service to platform as a service to take advantage of those cost savings, especially when some of those cost savings are quite substantial when compared to your VMs. Before I jump into the next slide, let's do what I want to do is jump over to the calculator for a minute here. So I just want to walk you through the calculator. I don't know how many of you have seen the calculator before and have played with it, but this is a very interesting process. I've been working in Azure for a number of years now, and as an organization, we have as well. Now, when I look through all this list, there are a lot of things to account for. So as you start looking at, this type of scenario, there's a lot of things you have to account for across the board. So what do? As we jump into these items, so let's just have a quick look. Let's just build a simple storage account, for instance. We had the storage account down at the bottom. We're going to have the option here to create a storage account. Now, I'm going to show you a few things I recommend you do whenever you're using a calculator. First of all, if you know why you're using a storage account, let's just say this is going to be backup storage. You can actually do this to help call out what this purpose of this storage is. You're going to pick your region. Be aware pricing is not the same across regions. This is really, really important to understand. You have to actually account for the fact that it could be different. So let's just say we're going to start North Central, where I'm located at. I'm going to stay with standard blob storage. I don't need anything special, so I'm just going to go with that. Performance tier, I definitely don't need SSDs for this because that would give me a premium, and general purpose is also fine. Local redundancy, as you'll see cost incurred. So when we talk about different estimating, if you need to actually store it, so let's just do global replicated. So in this case, I'm actually going to store a copy of this in a different data center. And then my access tier is hot, meaning I want the best performance to get it out of there. Be aware that you have other options as well. So we're going to go and we're going to do this at a terabyte. 1,000 gig works for me. So $41 what's going to cost me to do storage. Now we get into the fun stuff. This is things that you're like, okay, what does this mean? You have to pay attention to everything in here. Remember, this is 1 million operations and your price per 10,000. So, or 100,000 operations. So if I go, it's like $1. So if I think that I'm gonna have 100 million, I might get all the way up to $100. That's a very active scenario. So it's likely, we're gonna sit down. Maybe we figure it'd be 10,000. Okay, so now we're at 10 cents. These are all the activities. So putting data in, pulling data out, depending on what you're doing with the data, especially if you're working with a blob. So maybe you're doing some file work and you're doing some work in there. Pay attention to these details. Now, $1 doesn't make a whole bunch of difference, but if you know you have a seriously active and you want to handle a million, now we're up to $10 a month. So then we have the rest of these operations. Hey, list and create container operations. I'm probably not going to see 100,000 more of those. Oh, read's a little different than my write operation up here. So I might actually be at 10 million reads per month. Well, look at that price point. It is not a significant price point. So you're going to basically go out there and do all that. And if we're going to do any other operations, these have been added. This is what I talk about a lot. And, these have been added a little bit lately. So then we have global replication, data transfer. We're going to actually do 1,000. We're going to basically keep that in sync. So we have essentially data out. I'm up to $76.60. Someone asked a question. Can you show how to calculate standard pricing for 27 terabyte managed instance in Azure with 8 vCore? Well, because I'm one of those people that more than happy to try to do one of these to see what happens. So let's go up and look. Let's go grab a SQL database. We're all going to share together here. And let's go look at our Azure SQL database option. We're going to pick a region. We're going to just go with, let's stay in North Central because I like it. We're going to go manage instance, backup storage tier, stay local. The service tier is going to stay in general purpose. We're going to run Gen 5. We're running 8 vCore. And now we start looking at other options in our estimate. So I'm not going to dig into details in reserved instance and hybrid benefit. Both those you can catch in a session I did yesterday. But be aware that they can reduce your costs if you want to prepay or if you bring licenses to the table. So at this point, we have one instance running 730 hours as a standard month. And the storage here, so you're looking for 27 terabytes. And you are not going to be able to get that estimate in here. This is what you're calling out. So right now, you can see that we can actually go up to 8. And the problem we have here is what's actually supported straight up on manage instance. What we don't see here, so everybody's on the same page with us, is we do not see the pricing. Looking here, just making sure I didn't miss it. We do not see the pricing for the hyperscale version of Azure SQL Database. And I don't know why that is. It's a really good question. Typically, I go and run that estimate based on the cost per gigabytes. And then if you're running 8 core, I have to double check. My bigger concern is that I'm actually in a region that doesn't support it. Let's see if we can get to a region that supports hyperscale. Not seeing it. I'll have to dig around. So Omen is a great question, but as you can see, sometimes you run into situations that you can't estimate in the calculator, in which case you really have to jump over to the pricing details. So if I go over here, open this up, and then we dig into, what does it mean for the options we're talking about? And there's a little bit more when it comes to this scenario here, which is the which talks about specifically about SQL Server. So we can go and say, hey, we're going to do this. We scroll down, manage instance, service tier, pricing by month, your included storage, and let's keep going. I think we can get to, yeah, they don't have hyperscale listed in here at the moment. So that would be part of the problem, is hyperscale is still in preview, so we're likely not seeing it. So I hope that answered your question. All right, going back to our pricing calculator. So we added 2 things. We also know we have to add a few other things. So we got storage. We're going to go through the basics and say, hey, I need to add some networking. I'm at a virtual network, a load balancer, VPN gateway. So I'm doing that pretty quickly. I'm going through and adding these pieces. That's a good start there. Let's look at we already looked at our storage options. We're going to be fine with the blob storage account we created. And for the analytics side, let's add an eval. All right, so as we scroll down, now you can see my estimate, which I can label demo estimate for ADW. I can go in here and I can just scroll right down through there, and I can see all the pieces I've had. I can adjust them as I need to. So in this case, I got 8 core. We're going to go ahead and put this in at 100 for now. So that's 3.2. 3,200 total gigabytes, gives me total storage. Virtual network, data transfer. Most of this is, it's lightweight cost, but just accounting for it. So we assume that these pricing is what we're going to do. Keep on going. Oh, one of the things to watch is try to make sure you can get it in the same region wherever possible, because then you can get the right pricing. Basic load balancer is free of charge. Once again, we're going to go move this to North Central. And my VPN gateway is also going to do a North Central. And here, I'm not going to dig into the reasons I would choose a different VPN, but I'm actually going to go out here and I'm going to pick a different VPN, and I am going to say that it's available, that I'm going to use about 730 hours. And immediately you can see that price jump up to 263. And I'm going to just go with, I'm going to need 2 additional tunnels in that part of that process. And then inbound is free. And I don't have a global, but if I'm planning for a global replication, I think I need 1,000 gigabytes of movement. And we're going to delete for the sake of time, delete that. And then we're going to go back up here or down at the bottom, either one. So now I have a total estimate of 2,200, 3610. What I really want to do is I'm going to scroll way down. I'm going really fast here, everyone. I'm going to scroll down to the bottom. You can look at a couple other options. If you want to do support, I don't usually include support in my pricing because it's really something you can add on later. You can show dev test pricing. So if you click this button, it'll actually recalculate and say, hey, if we did dev test pricing. So if I'm only doing dev test, it'll drop that price to 1,600. And we're going to leave that in place. And then we're just going to export it. And we're going to open this up so you can see this. And this is a really nice feature that comes with this. So you can actually modify this after the fact. And that's what's really important here. I can go and take this estimate and go in and modify any of the custom names. This has a description. I can add columns to it. And one of the things to be aware of, I don't believe, these are not calculated columns. So if you end up adding some pricing in here or that kind of thing, you will find that you need to just make this a sum value. And the reason you would want to do that has to do with, depending on what you're working in a scenario, you may actually have to price things out differently for different regions or that type of thing. So you can see here that I made a mistake and didn't put this in North Central, but works pretty good there. This will tell you that Microsoft has our standard disclaimer at the bottom. I always let you have that included. But now I have a nice estimate that I can then share with people that has the information. I can actually add in the custom name column or update this to say, this is going to go ahead and enable editing real quick. This database supports our application. And I can add information along that line. So I just want you all to be aware that this is these are some of the things that you will always be looking for to take care of, and you can actually build out a much larger estimate around this. So once we have it exported, then you're actually able to share it with people, and it gives you a great option to do the estimate, and that's what we do. We actually build that out, and often we have to make changes. So let's talk about some deep dive onto some of the estimating problems that we deal with. Let's see here, just back to the presentation. So a couple considerations when you're working through this, and you saw a little bit of it already when we're looking at storage on the managed instance. Compute versus storage. Storage you're going to pay for. So when you're estimating, I'm going to show you a distinct, a specific situation which we did with Azure SQL DW, but you pay for use. If you're using it, it's there. Now, when you estimate, it's really important to estimate what you believe to be the average or the peak of the storage you're going to use for the time you're estimating for. It is really difficult to explain this to people that don't understand how pay for storage works, because most of the storage options, you just pay for it if you use it. So let's say you start out with an Azure SQL database, your estimate has 7 terabytes or 4 terabytes of storage being used, and you launch, and at the beginning, you're using 250 gigabytes. You'll be charged for the 250 gigabytes, not the full terabyte, because you basically are getting charged for the storage that you use. Really important consideration, and really important that you account for it that way, and don't try to just block blanket storage. Now this is going to help you when your estimates look good at the beginning, but you're going to immediately see them start to escalate as you start to grow, and that cost typically does not go down unless you move stuff out of whatever system you're working with, or if you're in standard storage, you end up using Cool or archiving to support archive data moving forward. So just be aware that storage, as long as you use it, while it is cheap, does add up and does accumulate. And as you continue to get more over time, you're going to be looking at alternatives for storage. Compute's a mixed bag. Azure SQL database, you pay while it's up. The pause is coming in serverless, but it's not available today, at least not on a production level workload. And so as soon as you turn it on, you start paying for it at the level you want to. Azure SQL DW, you pay while it's on, but you can pause it when it's not in use. Cosmos DB, your reserve capacity. You say, I think I will need X capacity and a number of RUs or request units I want, and you block them in. And you have to lock them in because they have SLAs. So it's still a compute scenario. The storage is charged as used separately. Virtual machines, you pay while you're active. As long as that machine is not deallocated or turned off, you're paying for it. You're still paying for storage separately, but you're still paying for the compute time on that virtual machine while it's up and running. So when you're looking at you're estimating, make sure you understand that those are the kind of things that you have to account for in this time window. You also have to account for elastic scale. You can pause, deactivate, so it's not in use. And depending on your usage scenario, you may be looking at something. Let's take SSIS. You're in a migration scenario. You move SSIS to a VM, and that VM has to be available for use 4 hours a night. Well, turn it off the other 20 hours. Well, now when you estimate, so maybe you estimate high, and you say, hey, we need it for 6 hours in case something goes wrong. So now you're estimating 6 hours a night for your ETL process to turn on the VM, get SSIS up and running, and run its jobs, and then shut itself down cleanly. You just saved 20 hours, or we did 16, you're going to save, or 6 hours, I'm sorry. You're going to save 18 hours per day in cost for running that VM. If you attach the licensing to that VM, meaning you did not bring a license with you, so you're not in hybrid or whatever, you can actually attach the license. So if you can run, say you can run it on a standard embedded license on a VM, you only pay for the license while it's on as well. So now you can see there's a couple other options in there to actually get there. You can actually manually scale. PowerShell can be used to scale services up and down. Azure Data Factory and Logic Apps we use in a number of cases to either initiate, like Data Factory, we use it to initiate clusters like Databricks clusters when we need to turn them on for ETL purposes. Logic Apps can actually monitor and then turn things on for you. And the Azure portal, of course, you can go in there and you scale it manually. Just go in there and say, hey, I don't need that many resources, and just turn it down. But the point is as you start to look at your estimates, account for elastic scale to the best of your ability. But sometimes you're going to, hopefully you see wins on elastic scale as you optimize later, as opposed to maybe in your initial estimate. I'm going to dig into a very common scenario for us at PromaticWorks. We do a lot of cloud data warehouse solutions, and a part of the estimating process is Azure Data Warehouse. What does Azure Data Warehouse do for us? So when we look at a scenario and we're going to look at usage for our customers, if we were to price them at a premium level flat across the board, Azure Data Warehouse becomes very expensive very quickly. However, if we optimize our DWU assignment for what actually we're doing here and there and in time, we will actually say, okay, let's look at realistically what you're doing. So our ETL window, when we load our data, we want to have this thing running at a high clip, because if you're familiar with Azure Data Warehouse, if you're not familiar, it actually does ELT. So we're going to extract, we're going to load data, and then we're going to transform it inside of the data warehouse. And using the power of the data warehouse to do that, well, if we actually ratchet up the power for DW, give it 1,000 DWs every window from midnight to 4, that means we're going to, shorten our processing window time and effectively reduce our cost, while at the same time taking advantage of the massive scale that's available in Azure Data Warehouse. So that's awesome. So that's my weekday schedule. So 12 to 4 a.m., I'm running ETL every night. Done. Well, between 4 and 6 a.m., let's assume all of our times are Eastern for the sake of argument. Nobody uses it. I'm working off the East Coast, and, I don't have a national presence. This is for those folks who show up early or can't sleep at night and decide to run a query. So I'm going to give them a little bit of performance there just for the early morning risers. During the day, during our primary reporting use time, I'm actually going to run at what we have determined at this case, 500 DWUs, which basically gives us a good report performance, but it's, not out of the world pricey. And then I'm going to go back to light reporting use at night. On the weekends, I'm going to run my ETL window the same way, because we know kind of what we want to do in that scenario. And then we're going to run 100 DWUs, which is light reporting use. But really, effectively, it says, hey, anybody who's working on the weekend, their reports will probably perform a little slower. But it's okay, because there's probably 1 or 2 people running reports, and the impact overall to the system is light. And we really don't want to pay for a lot of usage and time over the weekend. Okay, so I have no pause in this scenario. I have actually done work with customers who actually said, shut it down on the weekends. No one should be running reports on the weekends. And keep in mind, that's exactly what it means. When I pause it, no one can get to it. So you can force habits if you want to, but if we were to shut it down entirely, we have found that typically that's not practical. But in some scenarios, it works. Some people can actually shut this thing down when they're not using it, and they're good to go. This would be true for anything where there's a pause or deallocation, like VMs. Anytime you're not using it, realistically, you should be able to turn it off. Problem is, it's not really set up for on demand. So if I put a request in, it's paused, it's just going to get rejected with no connection. So you got to set expectations with your teams, but at least it gives you an idea. So I've built this. The schedule has been through a combination of working with our business, working with the data teams to make sure we handle both the reporting requirement time and the ETL processing time. So what does this actually look like when we flesh it out? Well, if we were to run 500, which effectively means, let's say that would extend our ETL window from midnight to 6, adds 2 hours of time onto our ETL process. So it's okay, minimal impact still, means reports will be ready and everything's updated by 6 a.m. So if I run static, so just those of you who are paying attention, we're running Gen 2, so this is optimized, and we're going to run with 4 terabytes of storage in the ECUS. So those of you who are familiar with Azure, if you're not, those factors affect the cost. If you move it around, change your storage, those kind of things. So if I use static compute, I am going to deliver 500 DWUs, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, making sure that we're optimized. And I'm going to do a 4-week estimate because I want to make sure I keep my hours really clean at 672 hours. My 4-week cost for compute is a little over $5,000 in that 4-week period. It means it's probably a monthly cost. I think when I looked at it, it was maybe $5,600 for the month kind of thing if you're actually doing monthly. Oh, Elastic, sorry, I forgot to change it. It was supposed to be 4-week cost as well. So if in the 4-week cost for Elastic, you can see I broke it down by hours. Now on the calculator, what you'd have to do is basically build 4 different DWU estimates on the hours that are specified and not account for the storage. So you can see here by doing this across the board, I've already presented 24% savings overall to my customer. Keep in mind when you scale, there's technical things that happen, right? So we're looking at estimates. The thousand, the DW 1000 is the most expensive. Well, think about it. What happens if you can find? We've found times when we can actually increase that to 2,000 for 1 hour, and actually save money for the customer and still complete their ETL in time. So I just really, it's really it's really just taking the time to understand how your usage patterns will change what your estimate should be. Now, if you go, where we're dealing with as customers who are running data warehouse today, the most effective customers are running in an Elastic mode. Some customers run globally, and they can't really take advantage of this. They actually have to run at peaks and actually increase their costs overall, but that's a different scenario. So the one thing to be aware of is storage didn't change for either of those scenarios. 4 terabytes for a month is $540 a month premium storage for Azure Data Warehouse. So as you build this out and you're looking at your estimates, you have to take into account Elastic scenarios and when it makes the most sense. So if you're doing this in this scenario, you can see we got a 24% savings on compute costs. The same thing would apply for any scenario where we can actually pause, shut down, or reduce scale in an automated fashion. Some of that's getting easier, like serverless options inside of Azure SQL database that are coming are going to make it so it automatically responds and auto scales, which completely changes the dynamic and how we look at this as well. Hidden or unexpected costs. So one of the biggest complaints about using cloud and one of the biggest hidden costs or unexpected costs that people run into is bandwidth. And this is true whether you're running AWS, Azure, anybody. They're charging you to pull the data out of their cloud. Azure doesn't charge you to put any data in the cloud. So when you're looking at a global solution, you're going to live in more than one data center in Azure. You have to keep in mind that is considered bandwidth that you're going to have to consider in moving data in and out. If you recall, when we were doing the global replication, we actually had an option down there to replicate that data. The reason there was a cost for bandwidth included in the estimate was to cover this cost. A 4 terabyte transfer out per month is around $400. Not an insignificant amount. If you're running a very large data center and you're running hybrid solutions, for instance, where you're processing a lot of data in the cloud, but you need to push a bunch of that data back to your on-premise data center, then you will also need to be aware of that. Because the problem is around that is that you have to account for the fact that's coming back. One of the big mitigations that we see customers take advantage of is ExpressRoute. If you're doing a true hybrid environment and you want to try to mitigate this, you can actually use ExpressRoute to mitigate your bandwidth issues because it's included. You include a certain amount of bandwidth in that and reduce your exposure while taking advantage of all the premium components that ExpressRoute brings to bear, including things like parallel pipes and those kind of things. So you have to evaluate that cost versus your egress costs and so on. So there's a few things to take into account. If you're concerned about this, falls into my 10% bucket a lot of times, because frankly, I don't always have a good idea about what is available. And when if I'm not aware, then basically I'm gonna put a 10% bucket in there and say, hey, this is gonna cover things like bandwidth and some other side little things that cost us extra money. Backup storage is another. What's your backup model going to be? If you're using platform as a service, there's a certain set of backups that are included. But if you have retention requirements, then you turn on retention. It's going to cost you. It's not a significant cost, but it is going to cost you. So you need to plan for those type of things. What we see is networking, security, performance. These are things that as you're trying to sort it out, will drive your costs up until you optimize or until you change how you're doing things with the platform. So just be aware there's a number of hidden costs, and that's my 10% bucket that I warn you about that are there. So just be aware. If you do that, you cover yourself, especially if you estimate storage flat and you're going to build up to that number. Between that combination with the 10% overage, then you're pretty safe on your estimating about what it's going to be to allow you to budget for it. And remember, if you come in under budget, you always need to look at estimating your cost in the future to make sure that you're handling your growth in the platform as well. We already did that demo, so I'm just going to move on. So after you've done all this work estimating and you start to land you're in the environment, the next thing you need to do is monitor. So it doesn't matter how good your estimate is. It's only as good as you find out you really are. And hopefully anything you learn while you're monitoring will help you make better estimates for continued use in your environment. There are a number of monitoring tools that Microsoft makes available to us. Azure Advisor and Azure Cost Management are both included in Azure as a part of the solution. They're not extra. You don't have to pay for them. They're just there. Azure Advisor will actually look at your VMs, look at express routes and your gateways, look at Azure Data Factory failures, and a few other items, and basically bubble those up to the top and let you know that, hey, if you actually were to shut this VM down or use a different VM based on how it's being used, so maybe it's leaving a lot of compute on the table, then that's one of those things that you can actually look at. Sorry, Scott says he can't hear. Is everybody still hearing me okay? I know there's been some comments about refreshing the browser. I just want to make sure everybody's still hearing. I'm going to keep going unless I see a ding from someone else. Okay. Thank you, everyone. I just want to make sure. It's a bad thing being a presenter as I can't hear it, so I'll make sure you're hearing me okay. All right, moving on. So as you look at the Azure Advisor, you have all those options. It's going to tell you some stuff. We'll look at the Advisor. Ironically, the Advisor piece of it is interesting to me because I don't have any examples that I can show you because everything we're working on right now is I'm going to show you our production environment because it's more compelling than my little sample. So we're going to look at some things, but Advisor will bring up a number of items around optimizations. We've had them. Frankly, I will tell you from experience, Pragmatic Works in our internal environment, we have done and followed some Advisor recommendations and have done a great job of managing our consumption as a result. Azure Cost Management. It's on by default. It's secured with Azure Active Directory, so that means that people who look at it have to have permissions in that space, depending on how your permissions are set up. And it's got a native portal experience. Now, Microsoft has done a lot of work. If you look at the bottom one, they're talking about Cloudin. They took a lot of that functionality and moved into cost management and just built it into the system. It frankly was one of the biggest things that Microsoft's gap was. It did not give you this insight. So people had third-party tools like Cloudin and other tools they're using to evaluate how are we doing? Because it felt like you get a bill and you're like, I have no idea how I'm really doing or what my costs are projected to be or anything I'm seeing. So cost management starts that process. They talk about when Microsoft talks about cost management in that tool, they talk about visibility, accountability, and recommendations. So first of all, visibility. It's got built-in reports and the ability to export to Excel. Why would you want to export to Excel? Well, if you export to Excel or to CSV, really is what you're doing, drop that into, say, blob storage, and you can actually have snapshots of your costs and your consumption, and then you can use Power BI on top of that to look at it and say, okay, here's what we're consuming, and you can run your own reports as well, add additional data. So maybe like resource groups are assigned to certain divisions, you have them tagged, you bring all the information across in your report, and then you link it up to information, like the management team and those kind of things. So you can actually talk about who's doing what and how things cost in the groups that you want to. That you may not organize Azure that way because it doesn't make sense on how you manage your environment, but it is really how you manage your costs. Accountability, you can actually set up budgets. I was playing with this a little bit. This is pretty cool. You can set up budget and max. You're going to laugh at my budget when I show you my budget for my personal Azure consumption. And then, which also in turn lets you also do alerts and say, hey, we're about to run out of money. I get alerts on our internal team. I'll get an email from Microsoft saying, hey, you're about to exceed, in this space. And then we'll have a look and decide if we're going to, go ahead and incur that cost or what the ideas are there. Then, of course, the recommendations are from Azure Advisor, and they'll provide the recommendations for you as well as other things. So let's just skip the slides and let's go into what we're actually talking about here. And let me find my... All right. So first of all, I want to be really clear. This is actually Pragmatic Works. This is our subscription. It's interesting because there are things in our subscription that actually we want to show you. This is the advisor. So while we were talking about the advisor talking about cost, you can see here we don't actually have any cost implications or performance issues that are active in our environment. But you can actually add more things like create alerts that you want to have alerts go on so that it actually show up in your advisor page. When you first time you open the portal, if you have advisor recommendations you haven't looked at yet, it will actually bring them up in a pop-up so you can see them and say, oh, I got something I need to look at. Then, so once you get in there, it's like you see here, there's no cost recommendation. So I'm gonna just switch this over to cost management. A couple things to be aware of. If you look on my favorites, just so we're clear, yours will look different than mine, but I do have advisor set up on my favorites, which will put me here, and then cost management also, because part of what we're doing is trying to manage the cost of our environment. So if we go to cost management, this is the, there are a couple views that we have in here. So this is kind of our accumulated cost over time. What's really cool is this is built right into the system, like we said. You can actually go up and export it to Excel or CSV, so you can actually download the data as opposed to just looking at the report. You can schedule reports, so you can actually schedule it so you have it. A lot of nice features there. I'm not going to do that right now, but this gives you that type of detail. This is looking at our month of October, our accumulated cost. So this is a pretty great screen for what you're doing. Now, we don't run a budget internally on this. There's a variety of reasons. One, budget's fairly new and introduced recently, but this at least allows us to look at where we are to date, what our projected costs are. You can see here we project to be at about $1,000 for this month. And then what's the distribution? So the service name is here, and you can actually switch these up to say, hey, I'd like to see this by resource group, for instance, and it'll refresh that screen for me, and it'll show me all the resource groups so I can actually see what's going on. So like right now, I can tell you that our CRM is at $90 so far for this month. We're moving over to Dynamics. That's to be expected kind of thing. We can also see the location of the resources that we have. Some of these are on by default, so I can actually go and pick and choose a number of these things that are different, and you can get this to look the way you want it to. Now, what I will tell you is, if you looked up here, the accumulated costs is a built-in view. So if we go back to accumulated costs and refresh this, it actually should, well, it's not going to change unless I come back, but it'll go back to where the original view was. So you can actually you have a number of built-in views, and you have in here the data ranges you want to use, and you can add additional filters. The other thing that's interesting, you notice here I have, let me scroll back up real quick. I have private views. So I wanted to look at this by resource group. So I actually have a view of my costs by resource group over the year period. So I can actually dig in. Now, what you'll notice is like the CRM group, as we started our rollout of Dynamics, for instance, we started seeing more and more usage in that group. And you can see as we scroll across, there's different things I can dig in from that perspective. The nice part here is that I can make this view be what I want it to be. I haven't actually changed any of these options down here, which makes a lot of sense if I did that. And you're able to dig in and actually evaluate what's going on in your environment. So what I wanted to show on the other side was, in my personal one, you can see, this is what I said, you all can laugh at my massive subscription number. I have my budget set at $8 a month. You may say that seems pretty ridiculously low, but that would be because if you go over to my cost management, I'm projected to spend under that, but I have my estimated budget at $8. My forecast cost is $5.73, or depending on where I land there. So I should stay under budget. I feel really good about this. Now, if I were to change my budget, it would show my overage. But I can see my budget line here at the top of my graph now, and it has to do with what's turned on or off in my environment. Be aware, to be clear, I only have a few things running. I have a SQL database, data catalog is running for me, and I have zero cost in my storage. Technically, it's under a penny. But this gives you kind of an idea that if you set the budget up, what that looks like, you get the budget line at the top, and you'll be able to say, hey, am I going to run it for budget? And then I can set up alerts and do other things around that, so I can actually be alerted when my budget's about to be broken. And I do have an alert set up if I go over my $8 budget. But this is my test playground, and it is a pay as I go account. So I use it for a variety of things that can't be done in all the free accounts that we have available. So hopefully you can see here that we have these options, and creating a budget is super easy. I go to the budget, and if I want to add a budget, I can basically add another budget here. And if I go in, I can change my scope. So I'm just gonna leave it in my pay as you go. I'm gonna say the other budget. And this is gonna, I always forget that they don't actually like it when you do that. All right, so this is my other budget. I'm going to keep this in a monthly period. My expiration date will be 2021, that's fine. And if I set my threshold to $4, and this basically says, hey, you're probably gonna hit budget here every so often. I go next. So it actually lets me see if how it's gonna impact me. Go next, and then I can say, all right, I can set my alert conditions when I'm at 50% of budget. I'm not actively using an action group. My information is too small. Alert, I can send it to Steve at dataonwheels.com, and I can create my budget. So let's go out there, validate my budget, and then let me know that, let's go back in there and fix that, because that budget should, not sure what happened there. Edit budget. Pay as you go. The other budget. I must not have gotten that right. Suggested budget. I don't want to do suggested budget. I want to go next. Let's do that again. See, now you can see my budget line move down where I expected it to be, and I'm over budget all the time. And save. And this is also going to give me my warning when my threshold is when I actually going to get warned. So now I'm over budget, and it'll send me a notification. So you can set this up. You can set up multiple budgets. You can set up budgets by groups. You can set it up for resource groups, all kinds of ways you can set budgets up. So if you're trying to set up for your team, this is a really important way to help track it. If you try to go to Cloudin, you'll actually see a note saying it's not available unless you're a CSP. So just be aware that it could show up on your subscription like it does for me. If I go back to cost management, I believe that Cloudin shows up because I originally was a Cloudin subscriber. It looks like I may have already removed it. There it is. So I get Cloudin in here, but I can't use it either. I had originally was a subscriber. So, all right. Next. Just about the end of time. Here's your optimization checklist. I just did one slide with some high, the biggest ones that matter. The first one that matters the most is if you're not using it, turn it off. And that's where you start looking at, you'll get some of that notification from the recommendations advisor. You may have to go out and look at, actual monitor consumption on some things and say, well, if no one's actually interacted with that recently, how do I get it turned off? Go turn it off. That's the thing. Use Elastic Scale where you can. You saw the example of Azure Data Warehouse. It gives you the option to use some Elastic Scale options to give you the ability to save money along the way. Auto scale when it's available makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense if it fits your use case. Like even SQL DB serverless, there are, you can actually have it go to pause where it's actually not available until someone sends a query in, but it will take, who knows, 1 minute to 5 minutes to rehydrate the database, depending on how big it is. So there's some nuances there, right? But the same thing with VM scale sets and app services. Use Autoscale to help you actually scale up and scale down so that you're not always having to manage it. If you migrated a lot of things over to IaaS because you either couldn't figure out how to move it to PaaS solution or not, you're going to see benefits by moving to PaaS. One of the biggest benefits is when we do estimating, for instance, in Azure SQL Database, and people are like, well, what's the difference between Azure SQL Database and Azure SQL VM? Well, the biggest thing that people don't understand is Azure SQL Database has high availability built in. And so that means that whenever you want to compare numbers, you have to take at least 2 SQL VMs to compare because you need to run them in a cluster. And when you set up a cluster to run them, you have a cost change there that you have to account for. Combining resources, so consolidation, like in our on-premises warehouses, on-premise data centers, we get the same thing. Consolidate. Use dev test labs to help reduce costs. This is great for if you actually have dev tests going on. Be aware that there's a part of the costs are negated by the fact you also have to have Visual Studio licensing with that. So just run the numbers, compare what you need, and see where you are there. Cold and archive storage are available. You use them. If you have a bunch of backups that you have to retain for 7 years for a SQL Server, take those backup files, drop them in the archive storage. Because if you have to pull them out anyways, you're probably looking at the 1 or 2 hours that are required to rehydrate those. You know what? It's worth it. The cost is so cheap for that storage, and you got to put stuff out there. And then reserved instances are available across the board. If you know that you're going to have a system up and running, and SQL Database, for instance, is going to be running for the next 3 years, you projected it will be. There is no reason not to do that. Now, keep in mind it's a prepay cost, but at least it allows you to do that and get that optimized. So if we go to, we'll take some questions now, but just remember that the whole process of estimating, there's a lot of things in there you have to keep an account for. The 10% overage is going to save you on a budget standpoint with your management team, or if you are the management team, as you start talking to folks about what you're doing, remember to count. There are hidden costs or unexpected costs in moving to cloud. That doesn't mean it doesn't make it cost effective. It just means you need to account for it when you're doing your estimating. And then, of course, there's all the components around globalization and other things that actually factor in. And then you have to factor in the reverse side. So if I'm doing platform as a service, I get high availability built in. I don't have to pay for that. I don't have to pay for enterprise licensing because it's included. There's some things around each side of this you need to account for in your estimate, especially if you're comparing options. Make sure you account for the real comparison. The monitoring tools that are available, Azure Advisor will always pop up and tell you the most common things it has set up. You can set up your own alerts. They pop up in the advisor. And then use cost management. Set the budgets. Get in understand what's there. Because one of the biggest problems folks have is all of a sudden they get a bill and it's really high. You should have already had stuff in place like budgets to say, even if it's set low, like my $4 budget, right? It should still tell you, hey, you're about to go over $4. Well, that's good notification to know. It's nice to know those things. And then, of course, optimization. The big things are turn things off, IaaS to PaaS, and then look at reserved instances. Those are probably the 3 biggest things that save you money across the board. That's what I have today. Are there any questions? And I'm sorry I couldn't help you with that. Reach out to us directly, and we'll see what we can do to help you get that 27 terabyte instance estimated. Well, either all of you are eating lunch during this, or I was very clear. I don't see any other questions, so I'm going to hand it back to the host, and she will take it from there.
Steve, I think you have one question in the question chat. I'm going to read it off to you really quickly. It says, can you show how to calculate standard pricing for
We actually did that live, and we didn't find the answer.
Okay.
Yep. So we're good to go there. So Om's going to reach out to us directly to give me so we can actually see if we can follow that up. So.
All right. Perfect. Awesome. All right, Guys, and thank you guys so much for attending. The next session will be at 1 o'clock, so we're going to give like a little lunch break here. So if you guys are looking to attend that, just go up into your left-hand corner and click the next session down. If not, thank you guys so much for joining. We appreciate it. Steve, thanks so much for hosting, and we hope you guys are enjoying your second day of Azure Data Week. And if you guys have any questions, sorry about I saw a lot about the refresh. Sorry about the sound and stuff that was going in and out. We apologize for that. We will get on that for the next session. But thank you guys so much for joining. And Steve, thanks so much for hosting. You guys have a wonderful day.
All right. Thanks, everybody.